Thanks, everybody. I'm going to talk today about providing information to bushfire managers, because I manage an information service. But the people who we're providing information to are people who are managing country. They're managing landscapes, but in doing so, they're also protecting buildings and houses. But they're doing so in northern Australia and remote Australia as well. So I'm not going to presume that this is a solution for your situation just here, because we know that the fuel loads are different, the climate is different, but the broader approach we're taking hopefully will be useful, and including the ways in which some of these efforts are being funded, not to mention the fact that this is sort of an optimistic story in that progress is actually being made in the face of, as you face here, worsening fire conditions. We have grass fires up there, but they are morphing into something that's a lot worse. So to the first slide, this is why we call it Painting with Fire. This is actually an image of central Arnhem Land from very recently. The green patches and patterns you see there are burnt areas. They're imaged by satellite, but we've highlighted them in green. The thing is, these are not wildfires. These are planned burns put in by people. This is a human creation, but on a very large canvas, and this is one of the keys to preventing wildfires in this part of the world. I'll talk a bit more about that later. First of all, to the connection with buildings, and buildings are threatened in the tropics. This is Lahaina in Maui in Hawaii. You would have heard about this about a month ago. The right-hand slide there shows the buildings in Lahaina that were destroyed by fire. The red marks buildings destroyed by fire. Most of the town was destroyed, but the fire started in the landscapes around the town. Now, that used to be agricultural land. It used to have cane fields, but that has gone in recent years. This is essentially unmanaged land around the town. It was overtaken by exotic grasses, things like guinea grass, these are quite flammable, and then combine that with these extreme weather conditions, high winds, high heat, which are probably not going to be as extreme as all that in years to come. And you had suddenly the landscape became a big threat, and such a threat that it burnt down the town. Now, we face similar conditions now in the Northern Territory. This is an exotic grass that's spreading south of Darwin. This is gamba grass. It was imported for pastures, and it's good grazing grass. But as soon as it gets out onto unmanaged grass, it grows like the bilio here. These are very high fuel loads, and it is now fueling very nasty fires that are threatening buildings. You might have seen my colleague Miguel's demonstration out there in the exhibit hall. And so what we're getting now are dangerous conditions that are threatening buildings south of Darwin. We have a similar grass down in central Australia, buffel grass, much smaller but widespread. There was a nasty fire in Alice Springs just recently. And I guess the point to note is that these exotic grasses are just adding to an existing threat to communities in northern Australia from fire on unmanaged country. And it's up there, fire is very frequent. So just to give you an idea, this is a map of, this is from 97 to 2013. This is a map of fire frequency across Australia over that decade or so, a bit more. And you can see that most of the fires, it doesn't include the 2019-20 fires, but it includes the 2009 fires down in Victoria. But you can see most of the fire extent is in the north. Now, admittedly, these are grass and shrub fires largely, but you can see that the frequency, particularly in the far north, is high. We're getting fires at least every 2 years, often less. And so you appreciate the threat very quickly up there. And what we were finding was that in the final years of the 20th century, the first decade of this century, some of these fires were morphing into something much worse than an average grass fire. So this slide on the right shows you what was happening. We were getting these very intense weather conditions, and places like Arnhem Land, for example, the fires were going into the crowns of the trees. You're getting scenes a little like you're probably familiar with down here, the sort of white ash that you get when a tree is properly creamed. And these fires were spreading vast distances, because remember, there's nothing much to stop a fire up there. Those landscapes were very sparsely populated. And so people were getting very worried about these fires. They were destroying not just fodder and infrastructure of cattle properties, but cultural and natural resources, across very large areas. Now, people realised that this wasn't always the case, that for millennia, First Nations people, Indigenous people, had been managing that country and large parts of Australia with fire to protect themselves from the wildfire. You can see on the left here, this is an example of what they call a cool burn. So the climate primes this landscape for fire. So what happens is we have a wet season from about December through to April. There's a lot of grass in the understory. That grass will grow vigorously in the wet season. And then we have intense dry seasons that go from about May through to October or November. And that grass dries out to a tinderbox around this time of year. And so that's when you get these big wildfires like you see on the right. So what people do is, and what they were doing for a long time was, as they travel across the country, they'd be putting in and breaking up country with these cooler burns in the early months of the year when the grass has just dried out enough to take a fire. And you can see it's quite patchy, and they break up country like this. Their fire management was a lot more complex than just this, but this was a key part of their toolkit. And so a bit over a decade ago, funding was secured to try and re-implement this management, because what had happened over the course of the 20th century, of course, and since European colonisation, was that people left their country or were forced off their country. And so we had landscapes that were largely deserted. And that's probably a core cause of some of these wildfires we were getting in the late 20th century, was that there was just nobody on country managing that country. And so the idea was to try and get people back on country, to try and put these burns back in again, to try and manage country again. And the way this was funded was through carbon credits. So you may have heard of, we have a methodology in the north called savanna burning. And the idea is that, well, if you're going to try and prevent these fires that you're getting on the right here, you can see the right has a lot less fuel. And all of that fuel has gone up into the air, and a lot of it is in the form of greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, methane, carbon dioxide. Now, they don't actually count carbon dioxide, that's assumed to go back into the growing phase, but methane and nitrous oxide is counted. And the idea is that you can actually if you succeed in preventing that fuel from going into the atmosphere, you can reduce emissions and you can be paid for that. And that payment can then pay for your fire management. And so that's how it's worked out. A methodology was established. It's been going since 2013. It's probably only since about 2015, a lot of projects have started up to implement this technique. But it's meant that a lot of people have been brought back onto country. And it's not just Indigenous rangers, it's pastoralists, it's also park rangers, private conservation groups. And in doing so, they've also succeeded in protecting communities up there and houses. So I'll just show you how that's going. So this is the community of Gumbalanya. It's to the east of Kakadu National Park in Arnhem Land. Now, what I'll now do is I'll show you the evidence of the cool burning that's gone on this year. So this is what they've put in. This is satellite-based data, and the green shows you the month in which those burns have been put in. See, there've been a lot of burning around the town itself to stop the fuel from building up next to the buildings and further afield. But what's going on here is that they're actually wanting to protect not just the towns, but it's about protecting country. It's a bit like what David King said. You want to make the whole country safe because, you know, your home is not just your town, it's your country. Your country is your home as well, and that's equally valued. So that's the thing we were looking at before. You can see these cool burns have been put in on a much broader landscape. And I don't know if this has got a little pointer on it, has it? Yeah. So you can see down here, they've been putting in these burns to, in these sort of intricate patterns up the valleys in the gorges, and that's to protect this country in here. This is the escarpment you might be familiar with from looking at pictures of Kakadu, the magnificent sort of cliff country there. But this has got a lot of major art sites in it, as well as a lot of fire-sensitive flora and fauna. And so they're doing this to act as a break, reinforced by the cliff lines here, to prevent the fires from getting into this country here, which has got high value. And these are reasonably cool burns, so they're not doing, they're only burning the understory. Nevertheless, this sort of thing, you know, if you're talking about Kakadu, you're talking about walking tracks. Walking tracks will often go next to the creek lines, which is where these burns are put in. So there has been some flack from bushwalkers, for example, who don't like the idea of seeing a lot of burnt country next to their favourite walking tracks. But the bigger picture is they're trying to protect all of this country in here. But let's zoom a bit further out. That was the picture we're looking at before. You can see this is a massive effort. So this is a network that's been put in across a huge area. Just to give you an idea of scale, that's the distance from Sydney to Katoomba. This has all been put in this year, in the last few months. So this is, I still get a slightly gobsmacked looking at these pictures. So this intricate network has been put in to essentially box fire in. So if a wildfire, and you can't really prevent ignitions, it's mostly human ignition, human-caused ignition, but also lightning, obviously. The idea is if a wildfire starts in any of these areas, it'll soon get boxed in by this network of cool burns. And to go even further, this is what's been implemented across Northern Australia. And all of that is as intricate as this burning here, which is there. But you've also got some of it being implemented in Western Cape York and in the Kimberley. There's larger fires as well. So, for example, around the northwest of the top end. So it's not everywhere, but it's a massive effort. And just to give you an idea of scale, these projects that are often funded by carbon credits are also large. So here are three of the larger projects. That middle one there, which is, we've been looking at the Western Arnhem Land Fire Abatement Project. That country there, that project is a little smaller than Belgium. And so you have to plan for and manage a fire project within a year that is a little smaller than Belgium. And you don't have a huge number of people who are doing that. So let's look at who is doing this work. A lot of it is Indigenous ranges, a lot of this is Aboriginal land, but they're not using traditional methods. They have to use choppers, for example, because you're talking about a huge area, and so they're using aerial ignition a lot, but they are also using vehicles and they're using on-foot burning as well. But a lot of it has to be done by helicopter. We're also talking about quad bikes, and we're talking about pastoralists as well as national park rangers and others. So these people are doing most of the on-ground work. Fire agencies are playing a role, of course. They have a regulatory role across all of these territories and states, but most of the on-ground work is being done by people like this. And they don't have access to the operational rooms of the fire agencies. They're, again, dealing with country that's sparsely populated. You don't have having people who are reporting in these fires. So they're having to get their information from other sources, and this is where we come in. So they're getting their information by and large from the website that we run, which is the North Australian Rangelands Information website, NAFI it's called, and it displays these burnt areas detected by satellite. They're updated frequently, and that's what people use to work out what have they lit already, what do they need to light, where do they need to light in the future, and also we are displaying the active fires. So what you're seeing here, this is from a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, is what happens when you do get these wildfires that will inevitably occur. The dots here, this shows fires that are detected in the last 6 hours, these pink dots. These are older ones here. And these yellow burnt areas, that's in the month of August, and that's probably a wildfire. So what they do is they check to see if their brakes are working. If it looks like a fire is going to get through one of the gaps in their fire brakes, they have choppers on standby. So on Island Land, they've got choppers, a bunch of choppers on standby watching NAFI. As soon as they see that a fire is going to get through their brakes, they're up, they'll drop a crew near the gap that the fire is going to get through, and they'll attempt to block the fire. And often they can do this with leaf blowers, because what you get up here is a lot of the fuel at this time of year is leaf fall from the deciduous trees, we have deciduous eucalypts, and you can actually prevent the fire by using powerful leaf blowers that blow the leaves away. So we are talking about different fuel types up there. But that's often how it works, and this website then and the data we provide, so we do the fire scale mapping, is tailored to meet their needs. Now there are other websites, important ones too, that provide satellite information on fire, but ours is the only one that's tailored to meet the needs of land managers who are doing this work. And so we take extreme care to map these fire scars as accurately as we can. Because if you're in a chopper and you get out there, you don't want to find that, oh, the mapping was wrong, well, we didn't have to come here at all. You've just spent quite a bit of money getting out to tackle a fire. So we have to make sure that these scars are as accurate as we can be and as updated as frequently as possible. And the other thing we do is we map the entire landscape. So this is managing country, and so it's like property planning. We're not just focusing on an emergency situation, we're mapping the entire landscape. And it's just like for a farm, you need maps of where your soils are across the whole farm. Here you need maps of what the fire's doing across the whole landscape. And that way you can end up with a fire history over multiple years. You can then start analysing that fire history to see where are my fires coming from, am I making progress in my fire management? And for this setting, importantly, you can work out, am I reducing emissions from fires? And our burnt area mapping is used to help calculate the emissions and the carbon credits people are earning. And the other thing is that all of the colours you're seeing, the icons, the tools, were all suggested by the fire managers themselves. And in fact, the whole idea of the website itself came from a group of fire managers working with scientists and technical specialists that recognised the need for a site like this. So this web service isn't even our idea. We were based at Charles Darwin Uni. And so the philosophy has continued in that we appreciate in these settings that most of the knowledge and information that's going to help people manage fires in these settings is inside their heads. It's not coming from us or from satellites. It's sitting in their heads because there's not a lot of data in these landscapes from other sources, but people have been living in this country for a long time. They know the weather conditions, they know the sorts of fuels they've got, and they know that what the fires will do. Now, I should caution that, of course, we're now seeing, even up there, conditions that were never imagined before. But that's why we also need to work together with Western technology to help people cope, in some cases, with conditions that they haven't seen before. But so far, people are working with it. But our goal has always been to build the capacity of these people who are out there, who are living there and who are going to stay there. And so we also have training programs that help people develop more familiarity with all the Western technology and the spatial data that's out there. They're helping them access satellite imagery, for example. And in their hands, on country, it's much more potent a tool than it might be for us sitting back in some office in a city somewhere. So that's another one of our approaches. And finally, with our mapping, because we've got this whole of landscape coverage, we're able to demonstrate whether it's making a difference or not. And this map here shows the difference in fire frequency between the first 7 years of the millennium, which is before any of this project started, 2000 to 2006, when we started seeing some of these disturbing fires, and a recent gap of 7 years or so between 2015 and 2021. And you can see the green areas are areas in which fire frequency has gone down. And the further south you go, some of that arid country, it's not as meaningful. It's influenced a little bit by rain. But up in the top there, with the monsoonal climate, that's a real difference that's being made. Fire frequency has actually gone down, and that's in the face of worsening fire conditions. And it's an even more pronounced decrease in the late dry season fires, the fires that occur at this time of year and onwards that are more intense. So, yeah, look, there is real progress being made on a massive scale. Is it perfect? No. Is it going? It's also not preventing. We're still seeing declines in mammals, for example, across that area as a legacy of what's happened in previous decades. But there are positive signs emerging of country coming back, and we haven't had any Lahaina situations where communities have suffered from terrible fires and been burned out. So there is some positive news. And the other thing is that the funding is really what's made the difference, the funding from carbon credits. Now, again, that's not perfect. Nobody's all that comfortable with having to manage on-ground outcomes because of the constituents of the atmosphere, but it means that they've got enough money to undertake these massive jobs. And there's a new method coming in this year or next year that will count the carbon dioxide that is sequestered into the trees and into the soil. And in some cases, that'll triple the income that these projects are getting. Now, a lot of these projects are already getting more income than an equivalent national park. And I can bet you bottom dollar that you're not going to see a tripling of income for managing country and national parks from government. So these sort of, so this has made all the difference, is the income from carbon, and it's tapping into industrial income from around the world. And that's the sort of thing maybe we're going to have to look with if we're going to manage these landscapes into the future. Anyway, that's in my talk. Yeah, so any questions?
Yeah, so Peter, thank you for that. That last picture doesn't tell the story, in my opinion.
No.
Had we done nothing? Thanks, Peter. So the picture, the last slide that you put up doesn't tell the full picture. Had we done nothing, then you talk about more fires, 17%. I think that's underestimating it significantly.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, so absolutely right. So the thing is, we were already seeing these disturbing trends in 2004. That was a long time ago. If you think about what's happened since then, yes, we could have seen absolutely terrifying fires since then. The other thing is, back then, gamma grass was just emerging as a threat, spread a lot more. So that's right, it doesn't tell the full story. We're not comparing like with like in comparing 2015 to 21 to 2004. And even so, we have made a reduction. So yes, it's and this is where it does get tricky to make comparisons. I've got a question. This is from Nathan Cairns. Are climate change impacts affecting the effectiveness of the prescribed burns and overall approach to fire management? Changes the weather patterns? Yes, they are. So just as you found down here, 2019 to 2020 was a terrible year. It was a terrible year in North Australia. I remember being in Cairns and we had a day of 42 degrees or something. It felt like Melbourne. And what happens up in the north where you get these bad fire years is that the window you have for safely lighting cool burns starts narrowing. So what will happen is you'll start getting really rapid drying out of the fuel. So whereas normally you could afford to wait until maybe June or into July to light a fire, in these bad years, you get to July and it's just not safe anymore. The weather has started to become more windy and hotter, and so your window starts narrowing. So yes, it does make a difference, but people have been able to work around that. But yes, it makes it more challenging. It hasn't, I mean, fingers crossed it hasn't dramatically changed the effectiveness, but if you compare what people were able to do in 2019, it wasn't as great as what they did in 2016, which was a much more favourable year. And another question. I note that promoting control burns as wildfire management offers benefit. However, what about the ecological risks including habitat alteration, potential harm to fire-adapted species, the proliferation of invasive species and air quality concerns? And grassland fires do release various gases, yes. So I'm going to look, yes, this is not there's no ideal solution going forward. There's no risk-free solution going forward into the future we face. So again, it's like, yes, look, there are risks. There are issues with potential issues with burning too frequently. If you're putting in a brake, people try and move their brakes around so they're not burning an area too frequently. But again, it's comparing this with what would happen if you did nothing, and I think it's chalk and cheese. That if we'd done nothing, you would have seen much worse outcomes. But by the same token, I think people don't want to accept that what they're doing now is the best they can do. Everybody's trying to improve the fire management with the further income they get to make it not just aerial burning, which is a bit coarse, but to try and get more on-ground burning to improve the interaction they're having with the much more detailed values of the landscape. And yes, there are smoke impacts too, not so much from the carbon projects, but Darwin is in a problematic position as far as smoke. Darwin is getting increased smoke loads now because it is to the it's in the path of smoke from burning that is taking place to the south and to the east. But a lot of that is not so much the carbon projects, it's the projects that are in that catchment. But yeah, smoke is an increasing problem. Oh yeah.
Thanks for that, Peter. It's on now. Just wondering if there, in conjunction with this, is there any sort of long-term environmental monitoring going on to determine if there are some positive impacts on, invasive weed species and numbers of mammals, etc.?
Yes, there is. I mean, so the Arnhem project is employing, and various of these projects are employing ecologists to look at the look at the species. One problem we face is, of course, is you need a baseline of what's happened before, and that's not always in place. So, so some of these studies and surveys won't make sense for a little while yet. And yeah, that's what we all want to see, of course. But we do know, unfortunately, that, for example, small mammals, before these projects started, have been declining quite a bit in the savannas. And that's a legacy of previous decades. So we won't be able to do much about some of that. And of course, fire is not the only thing. Fire's not just, we've got cats right across that country as well, pigs, invasive weeds, although hopefully, for example, these projects cannot continue if they have gamba grass on them. So they can't include anything that's been infested with invasive weeds. So hopefully that's a disincentive for weeds. Anyway.